When demolition workers smashed through a wall in 1869, they uncovered a secret so disturbing, new. York tried to bury it forever. In the spring of 1869, on a quiet street in Manhattan, something crazy happened. A crew was tearing down the old Blessed Widows Christian home on East 42nd Street. Just another abandoned building, until they hit a false wall in the basement. Behind it, 52 coffins, all in perfect rows, all holding the bodies of elderly women. But get this, they weren't just any women. Each one was wearing expensive jewelry, like diamonds and pearls. And beside every coffin, a handwritten ledger showing exactly how much money each woman had down to the last penny. That's right, someone tracked their wealth after they died. Except, here's where it gets creepy. According to official records, none of these 52 women were ever reported dead. Not one. They were all registered as alive when they entered the home. And then they just vanished. Movie camera, but wait, this was no random horror story. For 22 years, the Blessed Widows Christian Home was seen as a holy refuge for poor, grieving widows. It was praised by the media, blessed by the church, and funded by New York's wealthiest families. People thought it was the most trustworthy place in the city. But behind closed doors, it was a death factory. Every single wealthy widow who entered the building signed over her entire fortune and was never seen again. This wasn't just evil, it was organized and operated in broad daylight, right under the noses of the public, for over 2 decades. Fire before we reveal the truth behind this horrifying institution and the terrifying people behind it. Smash that subscribe button if you've got the guts for stories most people are too scared to even whisper about. This channel, it's for the ones who dare to go deeper. Comment what state you're watching from, so we know where our mystery hunters are watching from. Okay, now buckle up, because the deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing it became. This wasn't just random crime. It was a machine of death, designed to look like Christian charity. The killers were so precise, so polished, that even the most skeptical minds never suspected a thing. The building, a mask. The staff, accomplices. And the church, they looked the other way. Let's rewind to the 1840s. Manhattan was a city of extremes. Rich and poor lived worlds apart. And that divide, it created the perfect breeding ground for one of the most horrifying, calculated crimes in American history. And you're about to hear every twisted detail. I imagine living on Fifth Avenue, surrounded by palaces of marble and gold, while just blocks away, thousands were gasping for air in tenement prisons where dreams came to die. Welcome to 1840s Manhattan, where 2 worlds existed on the same island, one made of chandeliers and perfume, and the other of coal smoke, disease, and human despair. From the Bowery to the Hudson River, a tsunami of immigrants flooded the city, chasing freedom, but crashing into poverty, crowded housing, and a brutal truth. If you were a woman, alone and old, you were invisible, especially if you were a widow. You see, back then, the law didn't protect women. Your husband dies, his business partners, his family, the bank, they took everything. Your house? Gone. Your savings? Gone. All that was left was grief, poverty, and silence. But then, out of nowhere, in 1845, a woman appeared like a savior from the heavens. Her name? Margaret O'Brien. She built a home on East 42nd Street. Not just any home, a place of beauty, grace, and trust. A 3-story brownstone turned sanctuary. The shutters were perfect. The flowers changed every season. And right by the door, a golden plaque that read, Blessed Widows Christian Home, a haven for God's forgotten daughters. It looked like a fairy tale. But what no one knew was that this house would become the center of one of the darkest scandals in American history. Margaret O'Brien, she was brilliant, tall, strong, calm. Her steel gray hair, always tied back with discipline. Her clothes, dark, elegant, never flashy, but always expensive. She had this look in her pale blue eyes, the kind that said you're safe until the doors closed. She claimed to be an Irish immigrant, Said she'd arrived in 1839 with glowing letters from a Catholic church in Boston, and her accent, just enough Irish to sound warm, but not enough to sound foreign. People trusted her instantly. She ran charity events, took photos with priests, even got shout-outs in the newspaper. But behind the holy reputation, behind the flower boxes and polished brass, something monstrous was growing. And no one, not even the police, suspected a thing. Because in a city where widows vanished every day without notice, Margaret O'Brien built a machine that fed on grief and left behind only silence. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how deep this conspiracy goes. We're just getting started. Subscribe if you're ready to uncover what happens when good women disappear and evil wears a smile. Drop your city or country in the comments. We want to know where our truth hunters are watching from. What do you get when you mix a grieving saint, a super nurse, and a charming young priest? A dream team, or so New York thought, because while the world believed Margaret O'Brien was just a devout widow trying to save others like her backstory, it was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She'd tell it with misty eyes, the perfect pauses, a voice that trembled at just the right moment. I was born in County Cork. Married a merchant, died young of consumption. God gave me a calling to care for the broken. It sounded like something out of a movie, but Margaret didn't work alone. She had two partners, and together they built something so convincing, so compassionate. No one ever thought to look deeper. Let's start with Catherine Kelly, the home's head caretaker and medical guardian. Small, fast, everywhere at once. Mid-30s with tired hands that never stopped. Sewing, dosing medicine, taking notes. She moved through the building like it was her bloodstream. She knew every creak in floorboards, every weird draft, every moan behind closed doors. Her resume? Perfect. Trained at Massachusetts General Hospital. Worked all over New England caring for the elderly. A nurse's nurse. But as we learned later, she may have been doing more than just nursing. And then there was the wild card, Father Patrick Walsh, the chaplain, the moral compass, the young priest with a voice like warm honey, just 30 years old, dark curls he tried to tame, eyes full of soul-saving sympathy. To the older women, he was a son they never had. To the younger ones, a walking temptation they felt guilty for even looking at. But he carried himself with perfect dignity. A man of God. Or was he? Performing arts together, this trio created a theater of Christian charity so flawless, so heartwarming. No one questioned a thing. You'd walk into the home and see their mission engraved in bronze at the entrance: to provide loving Christian care for widowed women of good character, that they may live their final days in dignity, surrounded by sisters in faith. Sounds beautiful, right? But wait for it. Here comes a twist. This mission, it came with a price tag, a sliding scale. They called it compassionate. Fair. If you were wealthy, you could pay up front. Your savings, all of it. In return, you got a private room upstairs, special meals, private nurses, whatever you needed. Sounds like 5-star elderly care. But in reality, it was a trap. They weren't caring for the rich. They were collecting them, like antiques, like assets. And once the paperwork was signed, once the widow handed over a fortune, she disappeared. Quietly, elegantly. No fuss, no funeral. Just gone. Face screaming in fear. This wasn't a home for the forgotten. It was a gold-plated ghost house. And the trio at its helm? They weren't saints. They were the engineers of a perfectly disguised nightmare. And the scariest part? Nobody suspected a thing. Smash that subscribe button if you're ready to dive deeper. The next chapter? It'll shake your faith in everything that looked holy on the outside. Because the deeper you go into this house, the darker it gets. Let us know in the comments. Would you have trusted Margaret O'Brien? Or would your instincts have told you to run? On the surface, this place looked like heaven. Inside the Blessed Widow's Christian home, everything was perfect, like something out of a Victorian dream. Soft floral wallpaper, gleaming mahogany walls, A massive oil painting of Christ blessing little children. It screamed comfort, peace, safety. But remember, the more perfect it looked, the more terrifying the truth hiding underneath. House with garden, the entrance hall felt like stepping into your favorite aunt's house, not an institution. Photographs of past residents were lovingly framed on the wall, except those women weren't just former residents. They were dead. Margaret O'Brien would say they had graduated to their eternal reward. A beautiful phrase. But let's be real, it was a poetic cover for a cold, clinical disappearance. Residents spent their days in cozy sitting rooms, complete with plush chairs, games, books, and Bibles. Windows overlooked flower gardens maintained by the women themselves. Even the dining room was immaculate. 3 long tables covered in crisp white linens. Real silverware. China plates. Meals were strict. Breakfast at 7. Dinner at noon. Supper at 6. And you better dress right and mind your manners, because this wasn't just a home. It was a show. Every detail was built to make outsiders say, "Wow, what a beautiful place." Meanwhile, something rotted underneath. Catherine Kelly ran the kitchen like a general. Fresh garden vegetables, high-quality meats, a coal stove that never cooled down. Residents who couldn't pay, they worked, cooking, gardening, cleaning. And in return, they got a bed on the 3rd floor, not a private one, a shared room. Upstairs, on the 2nd floor, things were different. That's where the premium widows lived, the ones who paid everything up front. Their rooms were tailored like hotel suites. Each had a personal desk, wardrobe, photographs, and comfy chairs. They even had a private library at the end of the hall for quiet reading and reflection. Sounds like a paradise for elderly women, right? But wait, who decorated those empty rooms after the women graduated? Who picked up the photos? Who folded the bed sheets that would soon hold another unsuspecting soul? That library reflection? Maybe it was a place to read. Maybe it was where some women realized the truth too late. Because here's the thing no one wanted to admit. Sparkles' home was too perfect, too polished, too controlled. From the coal stove in the basement to the window boxes that changed like clockwork. Every inch of this place was designed not just to comfort, but to distract. Distract from the fact that over 2 decades, dozens of women entered this house and never walked out. Fearful face, but how was that possible? Who signed the paperwork? Who kept the books? And how did the neighbors, the city, even the church not suspect a thing? Stick around, because in the next part, we peel back the final curtain. And what we find is more disturbing than anyone imagined. Even the top floor where the staff lived was spotless. No luxury, but clean, comfortable, designed with the same eerie precision that echoed through the entire building. No room felt neglected, no corner left undone. Everything was exactly where it should be. But the heart of the house, the place that held it all together, the chapel, once a grand ballroom, it had been transformed into a space of holy reverence. Vaulted ceilings soared above polished pews. Stained glass windows filtered colored light across the room. Vivid scenes from the life of Christ. The altar stood modest but proud, crowned with a marble cross. Fresh flowers flanked both sides, hand-picked by the residents. Every morning, at exactly 6:30, the day began here. Father Walsh led Catholic Mass with practiced warmth and offered calm, non-denominational services for the Protestant women. His sermon struck a nerve, deep and personal. Loss, grief, letting go. He spoke of charity, forgiveness, of God's will, even when it broke you, and always, always about the beauty of releasing attachments to worldly things. Money, property, possessions. Letting go wasn't just spiritual advice. It was the house's unspoken commandment. The schedule was structured, but not oppressive. It created a sense of calm, a daily rhythm that lulled the residents into trust. After prayers and breakfast, the day was theirs. Needlework in the sitting room, mending, quilting, making things to sell in the market. It wasn't just therapy. It was income for the house. Behind the building, an enclosed garden offered peace and distraction. Flowers bloomed in neat rows. Vegetables climbed along wooden supports. Residents tended them with quiet pride. The red brick wall around it, tall, solid. The gates were locked, except during set times. They said it was for privacy, safety, but it kept something else in: control. Even recreation was curated. Reading was encouraged, both holy and secular. Newspapers, magazines, stories from the outside world. O'Brien herself often led group discussions in the evenings. They talked about the world beyond the walls. But slowly, quietly, the outside began to feel distant, unreachable, and that's how it happened. Not with chains, not with cages, but with soft voices, flowers and windows, predictable routines. These women, educated, wise, once wealthy, were gently ushered into a life where they were expected to let go of grief, let go of possessions, let go of the outside world, until the only thing left to surrender was themselves. Evenings at the Blessed Widows Christian Home were something special. Dinner wasn't just a meal. It was a ritual, a moment of warmth and storytelling. The women would gather at long, polished tables, sharing memories of their youth, of husbands long gone, of dreams that never quite came true. It was the only time the past felt alive again. Voices overlapping, soft laughter, forks tapping china. And Margaret O'Brien? She always made an appearance. Graceful, engaged, asking questions, listening, taking mental notes. Because nothing in that house happened without her knowing. What drew women to the Blessed Widows Christian Home wasn't just the flowers or the meals. It was the promise. Not a prison, not a luxury hotel, but something in between, a place that felt like home. New York City's poorhouses were crowded, filthy, and cruel. Private care? Way too expensive. But here, the staff-to-resident ratio was stunning, 1:6. That meant personalized attention, real care, actual human connection. Catherine Kelly managed a medical side with terrifying efficiency. Every detail recorded, every preference remembered, every weakness tracked. And Father Walsh? He wasn't just a priest. He was a lifeline, a counselor, a comforter. His door always open to women drowning in grief, anxiety, or fear about what tomorrow might bring. But it was Margaret O'Brien who held the most power, because she didn't just offer food, shelter, or faith. She offered clarity, legal clarity. She knew every twist of inheritance law, every shadow in estate planning, and she used it with surgical precision. Women came in with messy finances, confused, vulnerable, alone. And Margaret, she helped them put everything in order. Wills rewritten, property deeds transferred, final wishes clarified. She had the lawyers. She had the trust. And once it was all signed, filed, complete, the paperwork didn't go in a folder. It went into the machine. Because this home, this beautiful, sacred place, had found a way to turn grief into gold. The residents felt relieved, safe. They believed they were being protected. But what no one realized was that the most valued service at the Blessed Widows Christian Home was the one that made the women disappear. It was November 15th, 1847. A sharp autumn wind rattled the windows of the Blessed Widows Christian Home. Inside the chapel, the women gathered like always, wrapped in wool shawls, whispering quietly, waiting for prayers to begin. 6:30 sharp. Father Walsh appeared at the altar, as he always did. But something was off. The chapel felt cold, still, and one pew, the front pew, was empty. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore was missing, and that made no sense. She'd never missed a prayer. Not once. In 6 months, she hadn't been late to a single meal. Her routine was clockwork. Her posture, straight as ever. Her silver hair always styled in a flawless chignon. Her clothes crisp and neat. Just yesterday, she was full of life, leading the needlework circle, telling stories from her late husband's shipping empire, smiling, laughing, talking about letters she wanted to send to her niece in Philadelphia. At dinner, she'd been glowing, reminiscing about old Christmases, asking about holiday plans. She was planning for the future. But now, she was gone. The silence was broken when Catherine Kelly rose from the back of the chapel. And for the first time, her hands trembled. Her movements, usually sharp and composed, were hesitant, almost shaky. She walked to the front, turned to the residents, and with tears pouring down her face, whispered, "Dear sisters, I must share heartbreaking news. Our beloved Mrs. Whitmore passed peacefully in her sleep during the night." The room collapsed into chaos. Gasps, cries, grief filled the air like smoke. Mrs. Whitmore had been laughing last night. How could she be dead? Kelly continued, barely holding herself together. Father Walsh provided last rites. She said she was grateful that this home was a family she'd never had. Her final words were about how blessed she felt to have spent her last month among you. The women wept, but not everyone believed it. Sarah Brennan, 68 years old, sharp, quiet, observant, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something didn't feel right. Mrs. Whitmore had shown no signs of illness, no fatigue, no pain, nothing. And what disturbed Sarah even more was what happened next. Within hours, by noon that same day, Mrs. Whitmore's body was gone, taken by undertakers, buried. Margaret O'Brien delivered the news at lunch like she always did, calm, composed, glowing with grace. She expressed her wishes to me just last week. A simple burial. No mourning. No drama. She believed excessive grief was selfish. She wanted peace. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. But in all of Sarah Brennan's conversations with Eleanor, in all the tea shared, stories swapped private, laughs, she had never once heard Eleanor mention such wishes. In fact, she'd made plans. She wanted to write letters, visit relatives, even attend an upcoming winter gathering. Sarah felt a cold, invisible knot begin to form in her stomach. She didn't know it yet, but this was the first thread in the unraveling. Something inside the house had shifted. One woman was gone, and someone or something didn't want anyone asking questions. Sarah Brennan couldn't shake the feeling. The explanation had been neat, too neat. Mrs. Whitmore gone in the night, buried before noon. Her final wishes? Simple, quiet, private. But Sarah remembered the woman clearly. Proud, elegant, meticulous, and most of all, vocal. Mrs. Whitmore had spoken often and fondly of her husband's funeral, the procession, the flowers, the choirs. She had smiled when describing it, a proper farewell for a life well lived. Now suddenly, she wanted to vanish into the earth without a song or prayer. It didn't add up, and Sarah wanted answers. So she did what any friend would do. She asked to visit the grave, just to say goodbye. Margaret O'Brien responded with her usual grace, a soft smile, a firm hand on the shoulder. "I understand, dear." But her family, relatives from Philadelphia, arrived. Yesterday, they requested complete privacy. They don't want visitors. It's too painful for them. Sarah froze. Relatives? From Philadelphia? Mrs. Whitmore had only ever mentioned one, a grandniece. And even then, she described her as a distant pen pal, not close family. Now suddenly, an entire grieving clan had swept in overnight? It felt wrong. But O'Brien's tone left no room for discussion. Still, Sarah couldn't let it go. She returned to Mrs. Whitmore's room that evening. Empty, not just empty, cleansed, the bedding gone, the wardrobe stripped bare, the walls blank, as if no one had ever lived there. And the most chilling detail, every trace of Eleanor's life was missing. Her mother's ornate jewelry box, gone. The leather-bound journal she wrote in every night, gone. Photographs, letters, trinkets, memories, all of it vanished. It was like Eleanor Whitmore had been erased. Sarah, heart-pounding, turned to Catherine Kelly. "Where are her things?" she asked. Kelly's response came smoothly. Too smoothly. They were all packed up and sent to her family, exactly as she requested. Mrs. Whitmore left very detailed instructions. Her tone was gentle, but final, and her eyes, hinted that any further questioning would be impolite. But Sarah felt the floor shift under her feet. Mrs. Whitmore had been preparing for Christmas, writing letters, laughing, planning. She never said a word about giving away her belongings, never spoke of relatives close enough to claim them. And yet now, her room was a ghost, her story rewritten. Something was happening inside this house, something silent, something hidden, and Sarah Brennan had just stepped into its shadow. Sarah Brennan couldn't unsee it now. The pearl brooch. She remembered the way Eleanor had smiled when she mentioned it, how she wanted Sarah to have it, a simple gift, a token of real friendship. But when Sarah asked about it after Eleanor's death, gone, packed away, sent to the so-called family that no one had ever met, it was all too perfect, too efficient, too final. And as the days passed, Sarah began connecting the dots. Dark, invisible dots that no one else wanted to see. Because Eleanor Whitmore wasn't the first. There had been others. Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, a 70-year-old heiress to a textile empire, gone just 4 months after arriving. No illness, no warning. Mrs. Ruth Patterson, dead in her sleep, buried the next day, just like Eleanor. Then came Catherine Donnelly, then Margaret Sullivan, then Elizabeth Hayes. 5 wealthy women, all perfectly healthy, all gone within months of joining the home, all buried in haste, alone, and worst of all, no obituaries, no records, no goodbyes. Sarah searched newspaper archives, flipping pages with trembling hands. Nothing. These weren't nameless souls. These were respected women, leaders, philanthropists, wives of powerful men, and it was as if they had been erased. Until one chilly afternoon at the local market, fate handed Sarah her first real clue. She saw a familiar face, one she hadn't expected. Mary O'Sullivan, former housekeeper to Mrs. Morrison. Her eyes lit up when Sarah mentioned the home. But when she heard the words, "She passed away," her smile collapsed. "What?" Mary whispered. "When she never told me she was ill. She always said she'd send for me if she got sick. We were like family." Mary's voice cracked. She promised to write every week. But after she moved into that home, I never heard from her again. Sarah's chest tightened. This wasn't just Eleanor. It wasn't just a fluke. None of the women who died had kept in contact with anyone. Servants, neighbors, even distant relatives, all cut off. Letters stopped. Connections died. Silence fell like a curtain. The more Sarah watched, the more disturbing everything became. From the outside, the Blessed Widow's Christian home still gleamed. Meals on time, sermons full of comfort, laughter in the garden. But now, she saw the truth in the margins. Margaret O'Brien, so warm, so elegant, wasn't just a caretaker. She was a strategist. She'd sit beside new residents in the parlor, smile gently, and ask the most innocent questions. Did your late husband leave you well provided for? Have you thought about reorganizing your affairs? Inheritance law can be so confusing, can't it? What seemed like kindness was something else, a screening process. O'Brien wasn't caring for these women. She was sizing them up, testing the waters, finding the right moment to make her move. She didn't push. She guided, with the practiced subtlety of a master manipulator. She offered help, legal advice, financial assistance, estate planning. To a woman grieving, lost, alone in the world, it felt like salvation. But Sarah Brennan now understood. It was bait, and Eleanor had taken it. Sarah Brennan now saw the whole thing clearly. This wasn't a home. It was an engine, slow, quiet, and absolutely precise. At the center stood Margaret O'Brien, always smiling, always warm. But behind her soft eyes was a strategist unlike any Sarah had ever known. She'd built the system perfectly. "It brings such peace of mind," O'Brien would say, her voice silk soft, "to know that what we built in this life can go on serving God's children after we're gone." And the women, broken, grieving, scared, would nod. They'd sign. She wasn't demanding. She was persuasive. Margaret didn't just run a home. She cultivated legacy, one estate at a time. She spoke of inheritance law and estate taxes like a priest speaks of scripture. She had a referral list longer than a sermon. Lawyers, accountants, notaries, all trusted, all discreet, and the message was always the same. Let your death mean something. Let your possessions serve the kingdom. It was comforting, it was clever, and it was deadly. Then there was Father Walsh, youthful, intelligent, disarmingly warm. He didn't just preach, he converted minds. His sermons didn't feel like lectures. They felt like revelations. You cannot serve both God and money, he'd say, his voice full of calm authority. Worldly wealth is a chain. You must break it to free your soul. Residents would leave their sessions transformed, speaking about the vanity of wealth, the beauty of surrender, the blessedness of letting go. At first, Sarah had thought it was just devotion. Now she saw it for what it was: conditioning, soft, repetitive, intentional. He wasn't saving souls. He was priming them. O'Brien pushed the legal side. Walsh handled the spiritual. And behind it all, Catherine Kelly ran the body. Her job was quieter, colder. She knew every detail of every woman's body: blood pressure, sleep habits, appetite, medication dosage. She kept logs so detailed they felt like medical biographies. Residents trusted her completely. She spoke with the gentle authority of a lifelong nurse. "Oh, that cough? Just the weather. Skip lunch if you're tired. Dear, I'll bring tea to your room." She knew when they were weakest, how they reacted to different foods, which pills made them sleepy, what dosage made them disappear. Nothing in the Blessed Widow's Christian home happened by accident. Sarah was starting to realize every hug, every prayer, every carefully arranged bouquet was part of a design. This wasn't kindness. It was harvesting. It was late February 1848. The air in the Blessed Widow's Christian home was cold, stiff, and silent. Outside, snow blanketed the cobblestone streets. Inside, most of the residents were asleep. Peacefully, they thought, but Sarah Brennan couldn't sleep. Her arthritis always worsened in the cold. And tonight, the pain twisted through her bones like a vice. She rose quietly, wrapped herself in a shawl, and began walking the halls, a habit she'd picked up to ease the aches. But this time, something stopped her. A light, faint, flickering, coming from beneath the door of Margaret O'Brien's office. It was past midnight. What could anyone possibly be doing in there? She tiptoed closer, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread. The door was slightly ajar, and what she saw through the gap made her heart seize in her chest. Margaret O'Brien at her desk. Catherine Kelly standing beside her, notebook in hand. Father Walsh, leaning over with a pen in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. On the desk lay bottles of medication, piles of legal documents, and a thick ledger, the kind merchants used to track profit. A small bag of coins clinked quietly every few minutes. They were so focused, so relaxed, they didn't even notice her shadow at the door. And then she heard it. Mrs. Patterson mentioned her late husband's shipping investments again today. O'Brien said, writing carefully in the ledger, Catherine's assessment puts her net worth at least $15,000. No children, just a distant nephew in Boston. Sarah's blood ran cold. She's devout, added Father Walsh. She listens during our sessions. If we frame the giving as Christian duty, a path to eternal peace, I believe she'll follow. O'Brien nodded, calm, calculating. But we'll wait. Henderson was only 6 weeks ago. Whitmore just 3 months. If we move too fast, someone might start asking questions. Then Catherine Kelly chimed in, flipping open her notebook like a doctor preparing for surgery. Mrs. Patterson's already taking laudanum for sleep, she said, almost cheerfully. She doesn't even know it. I've been calling it an herbal tonic. Her tolerance is building. When the time comes, raising the dose won't trigger suspicion. Sarah's mouth went dry. And the legal documents? Walsh asked casually. O'Brien smiled, not kindly, but triumphantly. She's already worried about her nephew's gambling. I've planted the idea that the home is a better legacy than debt. When the moment is right, she'll sign it all over, as if it were her own idea. Sarah stumbled back from the door, breath short, hands shaking. Her mind screamed. Her body felt paralyzed. This wasn't caretaking. This wasn't charity. It was a factory, a carefully engineered death machine. Every word they spoke was sharpened with precision. Groom the mind, weaken the body, secure the estate, erase the life. Repeat. Mrs. Henderson hadn't died. Mrs. Whitmore hadn't passed peacefully. They were eliminated with polite prayers and forward smiles by the very people they trusted most. And now, Mrs. Patterson was next. Sarah clutched the wall, trying not to faint. This wasn't a moment of crime. This was a business meeting about murder. And worst of all, it had been happening for years. Sarah Brennan backed away from the door, step by step, silent, terrified. Her mind was spinning, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her shawl like armor. She didn't sleep. She couldn't, because now she knew the truth. She was living in a house run by murderers. The walls were painted with scripture. The halls echoed with hymns. But beneath it all, a machine, cold, ruthless, efficient, and she was inside it. For the next few days, Sarah moved with the precision of someone walking across thin ice, smiling when expected, nodding during prayers, sipping tea in the garden, all while hiding a secret. She was going to bring it down. But this would be no simple rebellion. She knew too much, and not nearly enough. If they even suspected she was investigating, she'd end up just like Eleanor Whitmore, peacefully asleep, buried in silence and forgotten. So she played the part of a grieving old woman. But behind that mask, she became something else. A spy. Her first mission? To uncover the true identities of Margaret O'Brien, Catherine Kelly, and Father Patrick Walsh. If they were capable of orchestrating murder, Sarah reasoned they were certainly capable of forging credentials. So, week by week, using her only form of freedom, her market visits, Sarah became a ghost among the city. She whispered questions, chatted innocently, listened like a hawk. Most people smiled politely and waved her off. But one encounter changed everything. An old man, hunched behind a desk stacked with dusty books and holy cards. Mr. Timothy Flanagan, the clerk at St. Patrick's Cathedral. His eyes lit up when Sarah mentioned the chapel at the Blessed Widow's home. A holy mission, he nodded. And you say your chaplain is, who again? Father Patrick Walsh, she said softly. Young, dark-haired, very passionate. Flanagan blinked, his brow furrowed. Father Patrick Walsh, he repeated slowly. There was a long silence. Then he shook his head. I've served the archdiocese for 42 years, my dear. We have no ordained priest by that name. You must be mistaken. Sarah's blood ran cold. There's a Father William Walsh at St. Mary's, but he's nearly 70. She leaned in, voice trembling. This man is no older than 30, maybe younger. Flanagan's expression darkened. Then he's no priest of ours. And if he's wearing the collar, he's doing so without Rome's blessing. Sarah nodded, tried to steady her breathing, trying to keep from shaking. He wasn't just a fraud. He was an imposter, preaching to vulnerable women, guiding their spiritual will, with no right to do. So, when she returned to the home, Sarah did something dangerous. She watched him closely, and what she saw made her stomach turn. During Mass, he moved gracefully, his voice impeccable, his theology impressive. But then something odd. He stumbled, not once, twice, mispronouncing key Latin phrases, ones that no ordained Catholic priest would forget. It wasn't just suspicious. It was proof. He doesn't know the words, Sarah whispered to herself, because he was never trained, never ordained. Everything made sense now. The fake priest, the orchestrated deaths, the forged legal guidance, the sudden burials. This wasn't just a scam. It was a religious cult of profit, wrapped in respectability and sanctified murder. And now, She was holding it secret. Sarah Brennan now had the truth, not just suspicions, not whispers, documents, ledgers, signatures, death notes. The horror wasn't theoretical anymore. It was written in ink, filed in folders, and hidden behind false panels inside O'Brien's office desk. She wasn't just living in a house of death. She was marked for it. There it was, in neat handwriting. Her name, Mrs. Sarah Brennan. Estimated estate, $7,200. Problematic, intelligent, observational. May require special handling. Every word sliced through her like broken glass. And below her name, a projected death date, 6 weeks from now. But it didn't stop there, because in that same drawer, behind a panel only a clever eye would notice, Sarah found a second ledger, future victims, all current residents. Mrs. Patterson, the kind widow who helped in the garden every morning, she had a date too. So did Mrs. Caldwell and Miss Ashby, even the quiet, gentle Mrs. Lindsley who hadn't spoken in weeks. They were next, and this wasn't just a single house in Manhattan. Sarah's trembling hands flipped through letters, real letters, that connected this charity to other homes in Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, each one operated by a different Sister Margaret, each one echoing the same language. Transition date, inheritance projected, consent secured under sedation, removed within 8 hours, no family inquiry received. One letter was a final nail. Be prepared to shutter the current enterprise if law enforcement becomes aware. Follow fire protocols for document disposal. Assets can be relocated to Providence. The writer signed off. Yours in faith and silence, Sister Margaret. It was a syndicate, a network of institutions murdering the elderly for their wealth, hidden behind religious devotion and social respectability. Sarah nearly collapsed from the weight of it all. She'd heard the horror stories of old women disappearing, of burials arranged in a single night, of rooms cleared out with surgical precision. But this wasn't just evil. It was organized, industrial, calculated. And now, she knew too much. The walls around her were no longer walls. They were traps, disguised with lace and lilies. The next step had to be perfect. She couldn't run. She couldn't scream. She couldn't confront them, not yet, because if she moved too soon, they'd make her vanish faster than Eleanor Whitmore. So instead, Sarah did what no one expected. She smiled. She prayed. She volunteered to help in the kitchen and started writing letters in secret. She told Mrs. Patterson she admired her embroidery and asked if they could work together in the evenings where they spoke in low whispers. If anything happens to me, Sarah said, go to St. Patrick's. Ask for Mr. Flanagan. Tell him what I told you. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened. She didn't ask why. She just nodded. Sarah began observing Catherine Kelly even more closely. Every medicine bottle, every spoonful, every time she touched someone's tea. She knew it wasn't just when they'd strike. It was how. Now, Sarah was playing a deadly game. She had to gather more evidence, alert more residents, and prepare an exit plan before the people smiling at her across the dining table decided it was time for her to sleep. The trap was closing. Sarah Brennan now held the truth in her hands. Financial ledgers, forged legal documents, poison logs, and donation receipts paid with the blood of innocent women. But holding the truth wasn't freedom. It was a death sentence, because a machine had begun to notice her. Catherine Kelly had changed. No longer the gentle caretaker with a soft smile and careful hands. Now she was everywhere, watching, appearing suddenly around corners, asking questions that sounded casual but were razor sharp. You've been sleeping late, haven't you, Mrs. Brennan? Did you enjoy your walk this morning? Where did you go again? The library door was left open last night. Did you need something? Sarah smiled back. Every time. She acted slow, forgetful, distracted, the perfect decoy. But inside, her heart was racing. She knew she had days, maybe hours, before Kelly decided she was a threat. And the stakes had never been higher. The records she'd found weren't just proof of murder. They were a blueprint of the entire operation. O'Brien hadn't built her reputation on charity. She'd built it on the bones of widows. Every smiling donation, every tea party, every church service and flower arrangement, all of it was paid for with stolen lives. $100,000 stolen. Properties in Brooklyn, investments in railroads, shares in shipping companies. The Blessed Widow's Christian Home was a front, a slaughterhouse in disguise. And the worst part? The city loved them for it. Churches praised them in sermons. Newspapers called O'Brien a modern saint. Even city officials had dined at her table, sipping tea while bodies were buried just blocks away. Sarah couldn't go to the police. Not yet. They wouldn't believe her. She'd be written off as a bitter old woman, jealous of the home's success. Or worse, silence before she could even finish speaking. She had seen it before. Mrs. Adelaide Foster. Kind, warm, hopeful. She had plans. A cousin in Boston. A letter written, bags packed. Then, sudden illness. Exhaustion, Kelly had said. Pneumonia. O'Brien had nodded. Sarah watched her fade. Over just 7 days. Dead by Sunday. Buried Monday. By Wednesday, her room was cleaned. Her belongings boxed. Her memory erased. Sarah knew if she tried to leave, she'd be next. But she also knew this. If she stayed silent, they would keep killing. So she made a decision. A final, terrifying, irreversible decision. Expose the truth from the inside. She began making copies. Of ledgers. Of death certificates. Of signed documents that no widow ever remembered writing. Each night, she slipped them into a hidden panel behind the chapel's altar, a place no one ever cleaned, no one ever questioned. She whispered to Mrs. Patterson, "If I disappear, tell the papers. Go to Mr. Flanagan. Give them the chapel key." And then she did the unthinkable. She wrote a letter, not to the police, not to city officials, but to a reporter, one who had once written about corruption in church-run hospitals. A young man named Thomas Hargrove at the Evening Star. She didn't sign her name. She didn't explain how she got the information. She just wrote, "They are killing us. Start with Eleanor Whitmore. Then ask how Adelaide Foster died. Then ask why no one has ever left this home alive." She sealed the envelope, trembling. She gave it to a messenger during market hour, with just enough coins to ensure it would be delivered by the next morning. And then she waited. Not for help, not for safety. She waited for war, because the Blessed Widow's Christian Home had noticed her. And now, it would fight to protect itself the only way it knew how. It had begun. Not the murder, not yet, but the process. Sarah Brennan was no longer just another resident. She was a name on a ledger, a number in an account, a problem that needed a solution, and the walls were closing in. Catherine Kelly had become a shadow, always there, always watching. Every day now, Sarah was asked the same gentle, probing questions. "Are you sleeping well? Any aches or pains lately? You seemed anxious during morning prayer. Is something troubling you?" At first, it seemed like concern, but Sarah had seen too much. She knew better. This wasn't care. This was calibration. The same way a butcher inspects the animal before the slaughter. And Father Walsh? He'd taken on a new role. Spiritual executioner, cloaked in priestly robes. He cornered her during walks, sat beside her at meals. And always, he brought the conversation back to one topic. "Death. Your spirit seems heavy, Sarah," he said one morning, voice soft like silk. "Perhaps it's time to let go of the worries that keep you tethered here. The burden of possessions, the illusion of control. It's peace that matters now." Sarah smiled politely, but inside her stomach turned, because she'd heard those exact words before in a different voice. Eleanor Whitmore's, just days before she was gone. And O'Brien? She had shifted from grandmotherly warmth to quiet intrusion. During meals, she asked about Sarah's estate, her accounts, her will, her family. "Forgive me, dear," she said sweetly, "but it's just so important for women of our age to ensure their wishes are respected. You've never mentioned legal counsel. Would you like me to recommend?" "Someone?" Sarah blinked. The same someone you recommended to Adelaide Foster? She almost said, aloud, but she didn't, because she knew they were testing her, watching for fear, listening for resistance, waiting for the moment she slipped, and gave them an excuse to accelerate the plan. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in her rocking chair with a candle, staring at her door, listening for footsteps. And around 2:15 a.m., she heard them, soft, deliberate, shoes that knew exactly where the floorboards creaked, and avoided them. The handle turned slowly, not enough to open the door, but just enough to test if it was locked. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She held perfectly still. Whoever it was waited a moment, then walked away. But she knew what it meant. The window of mercy was closing. They knew she knew. And now, it was no longer about silence. It was about survival. Sarah made a decision that night. No more watching. No more hiding. No more playing the good widow. Because now it was her or them. Sarah Brennan was running out of time. She had played the game carefully, smiling, nodding, pretending to forget things she remembered with photographic clarity. But the mask was cracking, and they were starting to notice. It started small. A bitter taste in her stew. A strange drowsiness after her tea. Moments of fog she couldn't explain, like the world was sliding sideways. At first, she blamed age, fatigue, stress, but then she stopped drinking the tea and stopped eating anything Kelly personally handed her. And suddenly, the fog lifted. Her thoughts sharpened. Her joints stopped aching. Her sleep returned. That's when it hit her. They were drugging her. Laudanum. Not enough to kill her. Just enough to make her slow. Compliant. Easier to guide toward the grave. She had been marked. And now, the countdown had truly begun. Then came the night of May 3rd, 1848. A night Sarah Brennan would remember for the rest of her life, if she lived through it. The hallway outside her room was silent. Too silent. Then, footsteps. Soft. Controlled. Deliberate. She leaned toward the keyhole, her heart slamming in her chest. A faint glow moved past her door. It was Catherine Kelly. Lantern dimmed low, medical bag in hand. Her face was calm, focused, not sneaking, working. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She watched, frozen, as Kelly moved to the next door, Mrs. Patterson's room. The lock clicked. Kelly slipped inside. The door closed behind her. Sarah didn't blink. Couldn't blink. This is it, she thought. This is how it happens. 20 agonizing minutes passed. She sat motionless, hands trembling, heart racing, soul screaming. She wanted to scream, to bang on the walls, to stop it, but she knew if she opened that door, she would be next, immediately, without mercy. Then, the door creaked. Catherine Kelly stepped back into the hallway. No bag. Her posture was straight, professional, satisfied. She turned, locked the door behind her, and walked away, like she'd just finished doing the laundry. Sarah collapsed back onto her bed, sweat running down her back. She had just witnessed a murder. Not imagined it, not guessed it, witnessed it. And if she stayed quiet, she would become one of them. A ghost. Another framed photograph in the hallway. A footnote in O'Brien's ledger. She couldn't do it. Not again. Not tonight. As the hallway went silent once more, Sarah rose. For the first time since entering that home, she broke the rules. She lit her lamp, opened her door, and stepped into the darkened corridor toward Mrs. Patterson's room. Sarah Brennan had two choices, run or risk everything, and she chose neither. She chose to fight back. As Catherine Kelly's footsteps faded into the black silence of the hallway, Sarah darted forward, every movement fueled by raw adrenaline and righteous rage. She crouched in front of Mrs. Patterson's door. Locked. No time. No key. But what the monsters upstairs didn't know was this. Sarah Brennan had a secret. A childhood spent in a Boston boarding house full of locks, and even more secrets. She pulled a hairpin from her graying bun. Her fingers shook. One wrong move, one sound, and she was dead. Click. The door creaked open. She slipped inside and closed it behind her, and that's when she saw it. Mrs. Patterson, motionless, pale as linen, her chest barely rising. On the bedside table, an empty medicine glass. The smell hit Sarah instantly, laudanum mixed with something worse. Chloral hydrate, maybe. Morphine. This wasn't medicine. This was a weapon. A slow, silent kill. But it wasn't finished. Not yet. Sarah sprang into action. She lifted Mrs. Patterson's limp body and shook her gently. "Wake up," she whispered. "Please wake up." Nothing. Then she grabbed a glass of water from a vanity and forced a sip into Mrs. Patterson's mouth. Nothing. So she did the unthinkable. She reached down her throat and triggered vomiting. It was brutal, messy, desperate, but it worked. Bit by bit, the poison came back up. Sarah worked through the night, whispering, holding, wiping sweat from Mrs. Patterson's brow, forcing her to drink sips of water, keeping her awake second by second, battling death with nothing but willpower and tears. Outside the room, the house slept, but inside a war raged, between life and the darkness waiting to swallow it. At dawn, Mrs. Patterson opened her eyes. Barely. Her lips trembled. Her voice came out cracked and hoarse. "They were to kill me." Sarah nodded, tears streaking her face. "They were, and they've done it before." She showed her everything. The ledger, the projected death date, the notes about her estate, the forged legal transfer papers, the code words, transition complete, last rights confirmed, assets redirected. Mrs. Patterson stared at the documents with glassy eyes. "They took my jewelry last week," she whispered. "Said it needed to be cleaned. I never got it back." Sarah's face hardened. "They were getting ready. Poison tonight. Burial tomorrow. Your things would have disappeared by noon. And by Sunday, you'd be nothing but a kind memory in the chapel sermon." The old woman shuddered. "But I've done nothing wrong." "Exactly," Sarah said. "That's what makes you perfect." She explained the whole scheme. They didn't kill for revenge. They didn't kill by mistake. They killed because it was profitable. The richer you were, the faster you died. The quieter your life, the easier you were to erase. Mrs. Patterson stared into the gray dawn light, creeping through the curtains. "What do we do now?" she asked. And Sarah, without hesitation, said, "We burn it down. Not the building, the lies, the silence, the mask." They would gather every scrap of evidence, get word to the outside, expose the truth or die trying, because now they weren't just survivors, they were witnesses. And witnesses, when they speak, can bring empires to their knees. Mrs. Patterson had been marked for death, and now, staring into the cold reality of that truth, she wasn't just horrified, she was furious. "They prayed with me," she whispered, voice trembling. "They held my hands while they planned my murder." But her fear became fire. "No more," she said. "No more smiling assassins. No more silent graves. No more widows walking to their own funerals." And that's when the plan was born. A fake death. A real escape. Mrs. Patterson would pretend to be unconscious, buying them time, while Sarah Brennan would do what no woman had dared to do in 22 years. Get out and tell the truth. But this wouldn't be easy. Because even if Sarah escaped the walls of that cursed home, who would believe her? Two old women. No family. No power. No proof. Except copies, suspicions, and scars. They needed someone who listened. Someone who believed in justice over reputation. And Sarah knew exactly who that was. Detective Inspector Thomas Fitzgerald. At 5:02 a.m., with the city still half asleep, Sarah stepped into the chill wind of May 4th, 1848. Her legs shook with every step. Her breath came in sharp gasps. But her mind burned with purpose. She passed horse-drawn carts, chimney smoke, fishmongers setting up stalls. The city had no idea that, just blocks away, a house of God had become a slaughterhouse. 30 minutes later, she stood in front of a narrow brick building near City Hall. 3 flights of stairs. Each one felt like a mile. By the time she reached the top, She was drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. But she knocked. Hard. The door opened. Detective Fitzgerald, mid-40s, sharp eyes, shirt still unbuttoned from sleep. "Yes?" he asked, wary. Sarah stepped forward, shaking. "They're murdering widows," she said. "And I was next." Fitzgerald blinked, paused, then invited her in. At first, he listened like a man hearing nonsense. The Blessed Widows Christian Home? Impossible. He knew that place. Everyone did. It was a pillar of the community. "Mrs. Brennan," he said gently, "that's one of the most trusted institutions in Manhattan. What you're describing, it would be one of the largest, most calculated criminal conspiracies in city history." "I know," Sarah whispered. "That's why they've gotten away with it." But then she handed him the evidence. Dozens of pages. Forged legal documents. Fake death records. Financial transfers signed by women who died days later. Codes like handover complete and no further contacts needed. Fitzgerald's face changed. The skepticism melted away. He flipped faster. His eyes narrowed. His hands tensed. Then he stood. "Where's Mrs. Patterson now?" "Pretending to be dying. If I'm not back by noon, she's next." Fitzgerald grabbed his coat. He didn't call backup. He didn't file paperwork. He looked Sarah Brennan in the eye and said, "Let's go." Because what they were walking into wasn't a home. It was a machine built to kill, and it had already sensed betrayal. Sarah Brennan had made it back. Barely. She crossed the threshold of the Blessed Widows Christian Home, her heartbeat thundering like war, drums in her chest, only to find Catherine Kelly standing right there, waiting, smiling, like a wolf in an apron. "Mrs. Brennan, wherever have you been?" The words were sweet, but her eyes were cold. "We were worried," she added. "You weren't in your room this morning." Behind the fake concern was something worse than anger. Control. Kelly continued, voice low, measured. "Mrs. Patterson took quite ill in the night. You wouldn't happen to know anything about her condition, would you?" That sentence alone almost made Sarah choke. She kept her poker face. This was it, the moment she prepared for. "Terrible arthritis," Sarah lied smoothly. "I just needed air, so I walked the market. I didn't want to wake anyone." Kelly's smile didn't budge, but something in her posture changed, like she had just confirmed something. "Well," she said, "next time do let someone know. At your age, a fall could be fatal." It was polite. It was soft. And it was a threat. Sarah nodded and slipped past her, every muscle tight, her brain screaming. They know, or they suspect. And the countdown just started again. Meanwhile, back in the city, Detective Fitzgerald was moving fast. And the deeper he dug, the darker it got. Magnifying glass still to the left first discovery. Banking contacts confirmed it. Massive cash deposits were being made into the home's accounts right after residents died. Not small donations. Fortunes. Amounts that screamed. Inheritance. Estate transfers. Not charity. Magnifying glass still to the left second discovery. Multiple lawyers confirmed Margaret O'Brien had personally brought them signed wills. All perfectly. Legal, all assigning full estates to the home. But something didn't sit right. Too fast, one lawyer said. No family claims. No grieving relatives. Just clean paperwork and silence. Magnifying glass still to the left third and worse discovery. The death certificates. Signed by Dr. Edmund Morrison. Except Morrison wasn't a doctor anymore. He'd lost his medical license 3 years ago. For, get this, falsifying death certificates. When Fitzgerald confronted him, Morrison tried to lie. "I don't know anything about that place," he stammered. But Fitzgerald dropped the papers on the table. 9 forged certificates. All with Morrison's name. All tied to women who had died peacefully in their sleep. And all tied to huge estate transfers right afterward. Fitzgerald leaned in. "You're going to prison for a long time, unless you start talking. Now!" Morrison cracked. He confessed everything. "O'Brien paid me. I didn't ask questions. I just wrote what she told me to write." Boom. Confirmation. Fraud. Forgery. Murder. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was a full-blown, citywide conspiracy, cloaked in religion, charity, and trust. And the worst part? They weren't done yet. Back at the home, Sarah Brennan knew she had to move fast. Fitzgerald was building the case, but she was still inside the lion's den. Every step she took, she felt eyes on her. Kelly was watching. O'Brien was silent. Even Father Walsh's sermons had changed. More guilt, more warnings about betrayal. "The Lord sees all," he said, "even those who plot in secret." And Sarah knew the end game was near. The truth was coming out, and someone was about to burn the whole house down to hide the evidence. Let's rewind. 1 month earlier, Mrs. Patterson was hours away from death. Sarah Brennan was dismissed as a paranoid old woman, and the Blessed Widow's Christian home was still a place of peace. Now, everything had changed. Detective Fitzgerald had the confession. Dr. Morrison, now exposed as a fraud, finally cracked under pressure. They were using laudanum, he admitted. Tiny doses. Every day. Just enough to build dependence. And then they struck. Final dose? A lethal cocktail of chlorohydrate and opiates. The result? A quiet death. Peaceful. Undetectable. I've worked with licensed physicians who know less than Catherine Kelly. Morrison said, "She's not a nurse. She's a scientist of death." Worse? This wasn't just one home. Morrison had shipped fake death certificates to Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, Richmond cities, where Christian shelters were quietly wiping out widows by the hundreds. "This is bigger than you think," he told Fitzgerald. "It's a network." Back at the home, things were spiraling. Kelly's eyes were colder. O'Brien's questions sharper. Father Walsh? Quiet. Too quiet. Then came the turning point. May 18th, 1848. O'Brien summoned Mrs. Patterson for a routine chat. Sarah knew what that meant. "This is it," she whispered. "They're going to finish what they started." There was no time to wait. No time for procedure. Sarah bribed a street boy with her last few coins, handed him a note written in trembling hands. "She's next. Please. Now." That note reached Detective Fitzgerald by 1 p.m. By 2:42 p.m., he was kicking down the doors of the Blessed Widow's Christian home, flanked by 4 armed officers, each with a warrant in hand. Their target? Margaret O'Brien, Catherine Kelly, Father Patrick Walsh. Charges? Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, forgery, theft, and possibly dozens of homicides. But what happened next? Nobody expected. O'Brien was waiting for them, dressed perfectly, sitting in the reading room, surrounded by residents, reading aloud from the book of Psalms like nothing was wrong. When Fitzgerald stepped inside, she smiled, calm, composed, already rehearsed. "Detective Fitzgerald," she said, rising with saint-like grace, "what brings you to our humble home? A misunderstanding, I hope?" Sarah watched from the stairwell, her heart pounding, her breath caught. This was it. The mask was about to fall. Fitzgerald held up the warrant. "Margaret O'Brien, you are under arrest of conspiracy to commit murder." Gasps, sobs, chaos. Some residents cried. Others refused to believe it. They had trusted her, lived under her roof. And now, she stood handcuffed in front of them, still acting like the victim. "I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake," she said, voice trembling with carefully. "Crafted sorrow. Someone has poisoned your mind with lies. I've given my life to these women." But Kelly didn't have O'Brien's composure. She snapped. "You don't understand," she screamed. "We gave these women dignity. We gave them peace." "It's her you should arrest," she shrieked, pointing at Sarah. "She's the one who's turned them against us." It took 2 officers to hold her back. "They're not widows," Kelly cried. "They're ungrateful." Walsh was next. "Try and play holy." "I'm just a priest," he stammered. "I never hurt anyone." But Fitzgerald wasn't buying it. "You signed the death prayers. You stood over the bodies. You knew what you were blessing." And then came the moment that silenced the entire room. Officers stormed O'Brien's office. They opened the drawer behind the altar and found original wills, rewritten in shaky hands. Signed estate transfers, dated just days before death. A ledger, 112 names. Next to each, a date, a net worth, and the word confirmed or pending. Fitzgerald lifted the ledger high. "This is your gospel, Margaret," he said. "Not scripture, just numbers and bodies." As they led the three conspirators away, the home stood frozen. The women, once victims, now survivors, sat in stunned silence. Tears flowed, but for the first time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of freedom. "You did it," Mrs. Patterson whispered to Sarah. "You saved us." But Sarah shook her head. "We saved each other. Because in a world built to silence the vulnerable, one voice, loud enough, brave enough, can change everything." Boom. The final blow had landed. Detective Fitzgerald stood frozen in front of a false wall in the basement of the Blessed Widows Christian home. What happened next? No one, not even Fitzgerald, was prepared for it. With a sharp crack and a rush of stale air, the officers pulled back the crumbling bricks and revealed a hidden chamber. And what was inside? Not just a secret. A graveyard. Wooden coffins, perfectly aligned, row after row, like the pews of a church of death, each one labeled, each one numbered, each one a woman, and next to every coffin, a folder, a file, with the victim's name, the method of murder, the date of death, and, sickest of all, the exact dollar amount stolen from her estate. "This isn't charity," Fitzgerald muttered. "This is business. Cold, calculated murder for profit, on an industrial scale." At first, they thought it was 21 victims. That was bad enough. But that number was a lie. Buried deeper inside the chamber were older ledgers, dusty and brittle, but intact. They told the real story. 52 murders. 5 years. Each death more refined than the last, like they were learning, evolving, growing bolder as the years passed. But the horror didn't stop there. Fitzgerald's team uncovered $700,000 in stolen wealth. Over $25 million in today's money. Where had it gone? Money-bag real estate across Manhattan. Money-bag stock in railroads, textile mills, and shipping companies. Money-bag donations to churches that were never questioned. Because who suspects a woman with a Bible? And a smile? O'Brien, Kelly, and Walsh had crafted the perfect cover. Kill quietly. Steal everything. Smile for the press. And society applauded them. But then came the final twist. In the back of the hidden chamber, past the rows of coffins, the officers found a locked cabinet. Inside, letters. Dozens of them. Correspondence with homes, just like this one. In Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, Chicago, Savannah, Richmond, all written in the same careful hand. All detailing methods, dosages, target profiles, instructions. It was a franchise of death. And O'Brien? She wasn't just a murderer. She was a founder, the mastermind behind a network of charities that weren't saving lives. They were harvesting them. When the news broke, the city erupted. Fire headlines screamed across the front pages. Christian home, a chamber of horrors. $700K stolen from dead widows. Woman saint turns out to be serial killer. Parades of churchgoers who once praised the Blessed Widows Christian home now march in front of its gates with candles and signs, mourning the women they had never met. One banner read, 52 souls buried in faith and in lies. And still, the basement held one final secret, a blood-stained notebook hidden beneath a loose stone. Inside, names yet to die, women currently living in other institutions, their profiles, their bank accounts, their weaknesses. They weren't done. They were just getting started. This wasn't just a murder case. This was a national reckoning. As investigators dug deeper, the truth exploded across the front pages of every paper in America. A charity of corpses, widows murdered in the name of God, the death network spanning 4 cities. From Philadelphia to Boston, Baltimore to Richmond, every so-called Christian widow's home, linked to the Blessed Widows Christian home, was exposed as part of a massive, coordinated murder, for-profit empire. And the most chilling part? Every victim was cataloged like an item in a store. Ring jewelry, camera with flash family photos, love letter handwritten letters, open book diaries, not discarded, preserved, labeled, filed away, not as memories, as trophies. Then came the trial of the century. New York City stood still as three monsters faced justice. Margaret O'Brien, Catherine Kelly, Father Patrick Walsh. Except those weren't even their real names. The courtroom gasped as their true identities were revealed. 1. Margaret O'Brien was actually Elizabeth Morrison, a disgraced nurse suspected in a string of mysterious deaths in Boston and Philly. 2. She wasn't a savior. She was a serial killer with a clipboard. 1. Catherine Kelly? Actually Margaret Collins, a former morgue attendant fired for stealing from the dead. 2. She knew how to clean bodies, how to inject just enough, and how to make every death look like God's will. 1. Father Patrick Walsh? Not a priest, not even close. 2. He was James Murphy, a washed-up stage actor who forged his ordination papers and used his charm to make grieving women trust him with their souls and their savings. He performed last rites, one officer said, but the only thing he ever saved was himself. The prosecution, led by District Attorney William Price, did not hold back. He painted a picture of a criminal enterprise so organized, so ruthlessly efficient. It rivaled the mafia. Victims sedated with laudanum will change his sign while unconscious. Bodies buried in secret. Inheritances laundered into legit businesses that funded the next wave of murders. They weren't caregivers, Price thundered. They were harvesters. But it was the survivors who brought the courtroom to tears. Mrs. Brennan stood tall, delivering a 3-day testimony that shattered the silence. I wasn't brave, she said. I was just the only one left alive long enough to notice. She brought her journals, her notes, the details only someone inside could have seen. And then came Mrs. Patterson. They smiled while planning to kill me, she said, eyes blazing. They prayed over my bed while holding poison behind their backs. If not for Sarah Brennan, I would be in that basement. The defense? A disaster. They tried to claim the deaths were natural. They were just bad at bookkeeping. The residents were confused and emotional, but the evidence? Unstoppable. Coffins in the basement. Forgeries in the safe. Bank accounts with millions of stolen wealth. Not to mention a ledger of death with every woman's name, date of death, and estate value written in. Perfect cursive. In the end, the jury didn't even deliberate for long. Guilty on all counts. And their punishment? Life imprisonment, no parole, locked away in separate cells, denied access to each other and the world. But the impact didn't stop at the verdict. Fire new laws were passed across America. Scroll widow protections were written into inheritance codes. Receipt elder care institutions were audited nationwide. Briefcase a federal task force was created to investigate crimes against vulnerable adults. All because 2 women refused to die quietly. The Blessed Widows Christian Home was torn down 1 year later. In its place, a memorial garden, lined with 52 rose bushes, one for each woman who was buried in silence, until Sarah Brennan and Mrs. Patterson gave them back their names. You thought the story ended with a trial? Think again, because when detectives started connecting the dots, they realized New York was just the beginning. Fire Philadelphia. In the basement of St. Catherine's Home for elderly women, officers uncovered 30 coffins hidden behind a sealed brick wall, just like the one in Manhattan. The killer? Elizabeth Morrison. Same woman, different city, same playbook. Before she became Margaret O'Brien, she had already been perfecting her methods in Pennsylvania. Fire Boston. At the Mercy House for widowed ladies, a former staff member came forward with ledger pages forged, wills and death schedules. They called it the harvest. Every week, someone was selected. Bodies had been burned in the furnace, records falsified, and families told lies like, she passed peacefully in prayer. She left everything to the ministry. Fire Baltimore. The Christian sanctuary for elder women had already shut down years ago. But what neighbors remembered was the smell, the quiet disappearances, the women who left with bags, and were never seen again. When authorities cracked open the foundation, they found bones, hundreds of them. The numbers? Over 200 confirmed murders, more than $2 million stolen, the equivalent of $80 million today, all from elderly women who believed they were safe, surrounded by faith, living their final years in peace. Instead, they were being bled dry one signature at a time. And the impact? Earth-shattering. Balance scale, new federal laws were passed. Mandatory inspections for every elder care home. Criminal background checks for staff. Independent legal advisors for residents updating wills. Scroll new protections were created. No more verbal agreements. No more solitary funeral decisions. No more secret burials. Because of this case, America changed how it treats the vulnerable. Forever. Graduation capped the trial, the final verdict. The courtroom was so packed, they had to turn people away at the doors. Journalists from every major paper were there. Church leaders, senators, widows' families. And when the verdict dropped, the entire nation held its breath. Red Square Margaret O'Brien, a.k.a. Elizabeth Morrison, guilty on all counts, sentenced to death. Her response? I am innocent. I was saving them. You don't understand. But the jury understood perfectly. On October 15, 1849, she was hanged before a crowd of thousands. People wept, cheered, prayed for the victims, and for a country that had finally opened its eyes. Yellow Square Catherine Kelly, sentenced to life in prison at Orange State. She died of tuberculosis in 1863, but not before writing a 1,200-page confession that helped police solve cold cases in 4 states. We didn't kill for hate, she wrote. We kill for order, for peace, for God. Patrick Walsh, sentenced to 20 years. He lasted just 6. Died of pneumonia, alone in a prison infirmary. A man of charisma who turned the word of God into a weapon. And the Blessed Widow's Christian home? Torn down, burned to ash, wiped from the earth. In its place, a single white stone bears the names of all 52 victims. The inscription reads, "They were not forgotten. They were not weak. They were not alone." If you're watching this now, it means one thing. You made it through one of the darkest, most disturbing chapters in American history. A story not about monsters in the shadows, but monsters in plain sight, wrapped in scripture, smiling with charity, praying over the women they were about to destroy. And somehow, 2 brave souls stood up and broke the cycle. The Blessed Widow's Christian home? Gone. The moment those handcuffs clicked, the building was shut down. For good. But here's the twist. When the house was finally demolished in 1869, what they found underneath the floor shocked even the toughest officers. More remains, more hidden trinkets, more stories of women who never got to speak. Scroll a comb with initials carved in. Open book a journal page buried in a wall crack. Ring a wedding ring wrapped in a handkerchief with dried blood. The total count? 52 full sets of human remains. 1 for every woman whose name had been whispered and then erased. But from this darkness, 2 women changed the world. Glowing Star Sarah Brennan, the woman who wouldn't stay silent. She became a national hero, a symbol of resilience, and the face of a brand new movement, protection for the elderly. For the next 15 years, Sarah worked tirelessly, not for fame, but for justice, helped write new laws to regulate elder care homes, partner with law enforcement to shut down suspicious charities. Loudspeaker gave speeches across the country warning against institutional abuse. Brain trained inspectors to recognize red flags. Her efforts led to mandatory background checks, regular inspections, and legal pathways for residents. To leave facilities that mistreated them. They thought we were weak, she once said. They forgot we had each other. Glowing Star Mrs. Patterson. She didn't just survive. She fought back with her heart, her story, and her money. She used her inheritance to found something the world had never seen. The Patterson Foundation, a legit, transparent, fully audited nonprofit for widows in crisis. It gave vulnerable women money-bag financial assistance, balanced scale free legal help, house-safe shelter from abuse and exploitation. And for women with nowhere to go, they opened the first-ever shelter just for elderly women fleeing predatory relatives, fake charities, and corrupt institutions. It had private rooms, legal counselors, 24/7 protection. The two women stayed friends for the rest of their lives. They wrote to each other weekly, attended each other's birthdays, lit candles every year for the 52 souls who never got the chance. They weren't just survivors. They became protectors. Today, in the middle of Manhattan, there's a small bronze statue, not flashy, not famous. It shows two women sitting together on a bench, heads bowed in prayer, hands clasped in strength. And the plaque? It reads, "To those who were silenced and those who spoke for them. In memory of the 52, in honor of Sarah Brennan and Eleanor Patterson, defenders of the forgotten." This wasn't just a story. It was a movement. It was proof that even in the darkest places, two brave women can change everything. You thought this was just one house? One killer? Wrong. What started in a quiet Manhattan brownstone turned out to be a horror web stretching across multiple states, built on trust, religion, and murder. After the arrest, Sarah Brennan and Mrs. Patterson didn't hide. They didn't go silent. They went public. They went loud. They shared their story everywhere. Churches, town halls, radio interviews, national newspapers, warning the world. Evil doesn't come with a knife. It comes with a cross and a smile. They became champions for forgotten, using their nightmare to prevent another collision to fall out. Massive. Congress passed the first federal laws protecting elderly women from institutional abuse. Every care facility had to. White heavy checkmark undergo surprise inspections. White heavy checkmark run background checks on staff. White heavy checkmark give residents the legal right to leave or report abuse. Scroll and inheritance law rewritten. No more backroom changes. No more deathbed coercion. Every transfer of wealth required. 2 independent witnesses. Notarized statements. And full legal review. The Blessed Widow case didn't just change policy. It changed how America protects its most vulnerable. But here's what really hits you in the gut. Those 52 women, they didn't just lose their lives. They lost their voices, their stories, their final wishes. And yet, their tragedy sparked a revolution. Their deaths weren't in vain. They became the reason others lived. Now here's the big question. Directed, could this happen again? You tell us. Are our systems strong enough now? Or are the elderly still one signature away from exploitation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Debate it. Share it. Discuss it. Because if we forget what happened at the Blessed Widow's Christian home, we risk letting it happen again. If the story gave you chills, fire smash that like button. Brain share this with someone who cares about true justice. Bell subscribe so you never miss the dark secrets history tried to bury. We dig into America's forgotten crimes, the ones you were never supposed to know about. And trust us, this was just the beginning. Microphone, until next time. Evil often wears the mask of charity, and sometimes the worst monsters are the ones who pray with you. Stay alert, stay aware, because justice